"You don't look like anybody worth calling," Officer Travis Cole said, his voice low and certain beneath the flickering neon of the Sunset Mile Motel, as if the night itself had already agreed with him. The red vacancy sign buzzed overhead, throwing broken light across the cracked pavement, the ice machine humming beside a row of dented doors that had seen too many secrets and too little mercy. A damp wind drifted in from the highway, carrying the smell of rain, old asphalt, and burned coffee from the lobby office where the clerk still stood watching through smudged glass. In the middle of that tired little parking lot, with a sheriff's cruiser idling at an angle and two curious guests lingering by the vending machine, Elias Grant stood still beside a faded blue duffel bag, one wrist held in a steel cuff and the other resting calmly at his side. He did not look angry. He did not look afraid. That was what unsettled the moment more than anything else. Most people argued when they were cornered in a place like this. Most people raised their voices, pleaded their case, pointed to receipts, room keys, and the ordinary details that proved they belonged. But Elias did none of that. He stood in a plain dark jacket, worn boots dusted with road grit, and the kind of quiet that made a careless man feel bigger than he really was. Officer Cole mistook that silence for surrender. He had arrived after the motel manager, Donna Reeves, reported a suspicious man walking the property and asking for room 214 without checking in at the desk. To her, Elias had looked wrong for the place, too composed for a budget motel off Route 61, too unreadable for a man carrying no smile and no story she found comforting. And to Officer Cole, that was enough. He circled Elias once, flashlight beam drifting over the duffel, the motel key card on the pavement, and the old black sedan parked under the failing security camera. "You got ID?" he asked. Elias gave him a long look, then glanced once toward the cloudy sky above the motel roofline. "In my inside pocket," he said. His voice was steady, deep, almost tired. "You can check it, or you can make this harder on yourself." A faint chuckle escaped Cole's mouth. Behind him, Donna folded her arms tighter and shook her head as if she had seen this kind before. One of the guests whispered something to the other, and the parking lot seemed to lean inward, hungry for humiliation, eager for someone to be put in their place. Cole stepped closer, pulled the wallet free, flipped it open, then paused for half a second too short to become doubt. Whatever he saw there, he dismissed it with the confidence of a man who believed his badge could simplify anything. "Nice try," he muttered. "You people always carry something that sounds official." Elias lowered his eyes for just a moment, not in defeat, but as though he were measuring time. Somewhere beyond the motel, a truck groaned down the interstate. A loose gutter rattled overhead. The yellow porch light outside room 212 flickered twice, then held. And still Elias did not resist, did not argue, did not ask anyone to intervene. He simply lifted his cuffed wrist an inch and said, in a tone so calm it almost vanished into the wind, "You still have a chance to take that off before this turns into a story you won't be able to outlive." Officer Cole smirked. He thought he was hearing a bluff from a nobody in a cheap motel parking lot. What he did not understand, not yet, was that some men travel without an audience because the sky itself knows when to come looking for them. Officer Travis Cole had always trusted the power of a pause. In his experience, silence made people nervous, and nervous people made mistakes. So he let the moment stretch there in the motel parking lot, the cruiser headlights washing over the puddles, the vacancy sign buzzing like a tired insect above them. And he watched Elias Grant the way men like him always watch someone they had already decided was smaller than their suspicion. Donna Reeves stood near the office door with one hand wrapped around a styrofoam cup that had long gone cold, her eyes fixed on Elias, as though she were waiting for him to suddenly become the threat she had imagined when she called it in. She had told Cole the stranger asked about room 214 like he knew who was inside, like he had business there, and to her that had been enough to turn concern into certainty. Elias said nothing more. The cuff rested against his wrist, catching the motel light every time the wind shifted, but his face remained unreadable. There was road dust on his jacket, rain beginning to gather on the shoulders, and the strange stillness of a man who had lived through worse places than this and learned that panic only gave cruel people music to move by. Cole slid the wallet into his own pocket instead of handing it back. That detail was small, almost invisible, but it changed the air. One of the guests near the vending machine looked away, embarrassed by something he could not name. The other kept watching, chin lifted, curiosity fighting with discomfort. "Who are you meeting in 214? Cole asked. "No one you need to worry about," Elias answered. "That room is connected to something bigger than this parking lot." Cole laughed under his breath. "You hear that?" he said, turning slightly toward Donna. "He thinks he is important." Donna gave a tight shrug, but she did not smile. Up close, now that the scene had gone on longer than she expected, Elias did not seem dangerous. He seemed deliberate. That unsettled her more. The old sedan under the security camera clicked softly as its engine cooled. Somewhere behind the motel, a dog barked once, then went quiet. Traffic on Route 61 rolled on without caring. The world always kept moving when dignity was being tested in places nobody thought worth remembering. Cole stepped toward the blue duffel bag and nudged it with his boot. "Open it," he said. Elias looked at the bag, then back at the officer. "That would be a mistake." "Everything about tonight already feels like your mistake," Cole replied. He unzipped the duffel just enough to glimpse folded clothes, a toiletry kit, a sealed manila envelope, and a compact metal case with no label on it. Nothing looked illegal. Nothing looked dramatic. That almost seemed to irritate him. Men who wanted power preferred visible excuses. Cole lifted the metal case and turned it in his hand. "What is this?" Elias stared at him for the first time with something colder than warning. "Property you do not want to mishandle." The words were quiet, but they landed heavier than Donna expected. She shifted her feet on the wet pavement and glanced toward room 214, where the curtains had not moved once. A lamp glowed faintly behind them, steady and low, as if someone inside had been waiting without ever approaching the window. Cole noticed it too. "So there is somebody in there," he said. "You want to tell me what kind of game this is?" Elias looked past him again, not at the room this time, but at the dark line of sky beyond the motel roof. The wind had changed. It came in sharper now, carrying a distant tremor too low to be thunder and too steady to be traffic. Donna frowned and lifted her head. The two guests stopped whispering. Even Cole, still holding the metal case, paused just long enough to listen. Elias exhaled once, slow and measured, as though a clock only he could see had finally reached the hour he had been waiting for. The sound came first as a vibration more than a noise, a deep mechanical pulse so distant it could still be mistaken for weather if a person wanted to keep believing the night was ordinary. But nobody in that parking lot believed that anymore. Donna Reeves lowered her cup and stared past the motel roofline, her face tightening as the hum grew steadier, heavier, like the sky itself had found an engine. The two guests by the vending machine stepped away from each other without thinking, their attention pulled upward by instinct. Officer Travis Cole did not move at first. He was still holding the unlabeled metal case in one hand, still wearing the smug confidence of a man who thought every strange moment could be explained away by his own authority. But even he could feel it now, that subtle change in the air when control begins to slip before anyone has admitted it out loud. Elias Grant stood exactly where he had been, one wrist cuffed, jacket dark with fine mist, eyes lifted toward the black stretch above the highway. He did not look surprised. He looked confirmed. The rotor noise thickened until it rolled over the motel like distant drums, shaking the loose gutter above room 212 and sending ripples across the standing water in the potholes. A porch curtain finally twitched in room 214, just once, then settled. Cole turned toward Elias with a sharpness that carried more irritation than confidence now. "What did you do?" he asked. Elias did not answer immediately. He watched the clouds, listened, then said, "I told you this parking lot was connected to something bigger." The words were not spoken with pride. They were spoken like fact, and somehow that made them land harder. Donna took 2 slow steps back toward the office door, all her earlier certainty shrinking into something more fragile. She had expected a deputy to show up, question a stranger, maybe move him along and restore the kind of order cheap places pretend to have. She had not expected the sky to answer. The first searchlight cut through the cloud cover a second later, pale and sweeping, gliding over the motel sign and the row of parked cars until every faded surface seemed suddenly exposed. Then came the second beam, then the shape itself, descending low enough for the gusting wind to scatter leaves, dust, and old receipts across the asphalt. The guests near the vending machine ducked their heads, and stumbled toward the wall. Donna raised an arm over her face. Officer Cole took one involuntary step backward. A dark helicopter moved across the motel roofline with terrible precision. Then another shape followed behind it, lower than the clouds, heavier than any explanation his mind could assemble quickly. The roar filled the lot now, swallowed the interstate, swallowed the buzz of the vacancy sign, swallowed even the little sounds of embarrassment that had defined the last 10 minutes. There was only force, light, and the cold truth of arrival. Cole looked down at the metal case in his hand, then at the cuff on Elias's wrist, and for the first time that night, he seemed to realize that objects could become evidence faster than excuses could become protection. "Who are you?" he demanded, but his voice sounded smaller now, thinner, dragged apart by the wind. Elias turned toward him slowly. His expression did not change. "I was trying to give you a quiet way out," he said. Tires crunched on gravel beyond the motel entrance. Headlights appeared from the service road, too many and too disciplined to belong to chance. The helicopter hovered just far enough to cast the lot in a moving wash of light and shadow, and in that pulsing brightness Donna saw something she would remember for years afterward. Not fear in Elias Grant's face, not triumph, but the stillness of a man whose rescue had never been a question, only a matter of timing. Officer Cole reached for his radio, but stopped before touching it. He did not know who to call anymore. The night had outgrown him. The parking lot became a place of moving shadows and hard white light, the kind of light that stripped every excuse down to its bones. Rotor wash rolled across the cracked asphalt, pushing grit against the motel doors and rattling the loose metal numbers on each room. The vacancy sign flickered wildly now, red glow cutting through the sweeping beams from above. And for one long breath nobody seemed to know whether to run, speak, or simply stand there and accept that the night had changed shape in front of them. Officer Travis Cole finally lowered the metal case in his hand, but he did not let go of it. His fingers tightened instead, as though holding onto the wrong object might somehow keep him from losing the larger thing already slipping away. Donna Reeves had backed herself against the office doorway, one hand pressed to her chest, her earlier suspicion drained into pale silence. The two guests by the vending machine were no longer pretending curiosity. They looked frightened now, not because anyone had threatened them, but because power had arrived in a form too large for ordinary people to explain to themselves. Then the convoy entered the lot. Dark sport utility vehicles and mat trucks rolled in from the service road in a clean, controlled line, tires hissing over wet gravel before stopping with exact spacing that spoke of training, not improvisation. Doors opened almost at once. Men and women in dark field jackets moved with the kind of calm that came from knowing exactly where to stand and exactly what mattered. No one shouted. No one rushed. That made it worse for Travis Cole, because chaos he might have answered with ego, but order of this kind left. No room for performance. A tall man stepped from the lead vehicle, broad-shouldered, silver at the temples, his jacket collar pulled high against the wind. He carried no visible drama, only authority so settled it did not need to announce itself. His eyes passed over the motel, the hovering aircraft, the witnesses, the cruiser, and finally landed on Elias Grant. In that instant, something invisible seemed to lock into place. "Commander Grant," the man said, voice steady, carrying even through the heavy air. "Are you all right?" Elias inclined his head once. "Delayed, Colonel Hale. Not compromised." The words hit the parking lot harder than the rotor noise. Donna blinked as if she had misheard them. One of the guests actually took a step back and looked at Elias all over again, as though a new face might appear if he stared long enough. Travis Cole did not move. The title alone had emptied the night of every assumption he had built it on. Colonel Marcus Hale walked forward, not fast, not angry, just certain. He stopped 3 feet from Cole and looked first at the cuff on Elias's wrist, then at the wallet still half visible in Cole's pocket, then at the metal case in his hand. There was no raised voice, no dramatic gesture, only a silence so clean it made the deputy's breathing sound clumsy. "Take the restraint off him," Hale said. Cole swallowed. "I was conducting a lawful stop," he replied, trying to gather himself inside the uniform that had always done part of the talking for him. This individual refused to identify the nature of his business and was found on private property making contact with a room under active concern. Colonel Hale's expression did not change. He identified enough for you to know caution was required. You chose confidence instead. That sentence landed with the quiet precision of a door closing. Travis shifted his weight and glanced around, as if looking for someone from his own side of the world to validate him. But there was no one left to do it. His cruiser looked smaller now. His radio looked ornamental. Even the cuff key in his hand suddenly seemed like an object he had no right to hold. Elias finally turned his gaze back to him. There was no anger in it, only a tired kind of disappointment that felt somehow worse. I told you there was a quiet way out, he said. The helicopter lights swept across them once more, and under that cold, moving brightness Travis Cole understood something he had never had to learn before. Sometimes the difference between authority and arrogance is only revealed when real power arrives and asks to see your hands. For a few seconds nobody moved. The cuff key sat in Officer Travis Cole's hand like a final test of character, small and metallic, and suddenly far heavier than it should have been. The rotor wash still swept across the lot in waves, flattening the weeds along the fence and tugging at the hem of Donna Reeves's cardigan. But beneath all that motion, a strange stillness had settled over the scene, the kind that comes when truth has entered the room and every lie is deciding whether to stand or collapse. Colonel Marcus Hale did not repeat himself. He did not need to. His team had already spread through the edges of the motel property with measured discipline, securing sight lines, checking entries, and scanning windows without drama. They moved like people carrying responsibility instead of ego, and that difference was impossible not to notice. Travis finally stepped toward Elias Grant and reached for the cuff, but his fingers fumbled once before finding the lock. The click that followed was quiet, almost swallowed by the aircraft overhead, yet everyone heard it. Elias lowered his freed hand slowly and rubbed the red mark on his wrist with the calm detachment of someone who had already filed the moment away for later. He did not glare at Travis. He did not try to embarrass him. Somehow that mercy made the deputy look even smaller. Colonel Hale extended a hand, and one of his personnel immediately took the metal case from Travis with professional care, then handed it back to Elias as though returning an object that should never have left its owner's reach. Donna stared at the case, then at Elias, then back at room 214. "What is happening here?" she asked, voice thin and uncertain. It was the first honest question she had asked all night. Hale turned toward her, and though his face remained firm, his tone was not unkind. "A protected transfer was scheduled through this location," he said. "Temporary lodging, temporary contact, minimal visibility. Your call changed the timeline." Donna's mouth parted, but no defense came. Minimal visibility. The phrase seemed to wound her in some private place because she understood at once what it meant. The motel had not been chosen because it was respectable. It had been chosen because nobody looked twice at places like this unless they were trained to. And she had looked twice for all the wrong reasons. Elias glanced toward room 214 again. The curtain moved, just enough to show that someone inside was still there, still waiting, still depending on a chain of events that had nearly been broken by pride and assumption. Was the room compromised? Hale asked. No, Elias answered. But it came close. Those 4 words spread through the parking lot like cold water. Travis opened his mouth as if to explain himself, to reclaim even a fraction of what had slipped away, but Hale raised one hand and stopped him without effort. "Your report can wait," the colonel said. "Right now, my concern is the mission your judgment nearly disrupted." Mission. That word landed differently than Commander had. It widened the night. It made the motel seem smaller, the interstate farther away, the whole ugly little misunderstanding part of something that had been moving long before Travis Cole ever turned into the lot with his lights on. One of Hale's people approached and spoke quietly into his ear. Hale nodded once. "We move in 90 seconds, he said. "Secondary route. No more delays." Elias picked up the blue duffel bag, then paused as if remembering something unfinished. He turned back toward Travis, whose face had gone pale under the sweep of the searchlight. The deputy still looked stunned, but beneath the shock another feeling had appeared, one he had probably not felt in years. Shame without an audience to perform for. Elias held his gaze for one long second. "You saw a cheap motel and decided that meant cheap truth," he said. "That was your mistake." No one answered. Not Donna. Not the guests. Not even the wind seemed willing to interrupt. And as the team prepared to move toward room 214 with the efficiency of people who understood what was at stake, Travis Cole stood beside his own cruiser and realized that what had darkened around him was not only the sky. It was the collapse of every lazy certainty he had ever worn like a second badge. The team moved with the quiet urgency of people who knew that every extra second invited a new kind of risk. Colonel Marcus Hale gave 2 short instructions, and the formation shifted at once, not rushed, not theatrical, just precise. One pair peeled toward the rear walkway behind the motel. Another covered the stairwell at the far end of the row. A woman with a tablet stepped beneath the overhang outside room 212 and checked something against a digital map, while the helicopter above adjusted position, its searchlight sliding away from the parking lot and toward the dark tree line beyond the property. Elias Grant crossed the wet pavement carrying the blue duffel in one hand and the recovered metal case in the other, his pace calm, his shoulders steady, as though the last 20 minutes had been an inconvenience rather than a public humiliation. That steadiness bothered Travis Cole more than anger would have. Anger he could have dismissed as attitude. Calm like this forced him to see himself. Donna Reeves stayed near the office, hugging her arms tight across her chest now, looking less like the owner of the place than a woman who had accidentally opened the wrong door and found something vast standing behind it. The 2 guests near the vending machine had gone silent in the purest sense, not speaking because they had nothing left to guess at. They were watching the difference between noise and authority unfold in real time. Elias reached room 214 and paused. He did not knock. He gave a specific pattern against the door, light and measured, then stepped half a pace back. Inside, the lamp went out. A chain slid free. The door opened only a few inches before a narrow face appeared in the gap, anxious and pale beneath the low room light. It was a woman in her 40s, hair pulled back, eyes moving quickly over Elias, then past him to the security detail in the lot. Whatever fear she had been carrying all evening softened the moment she saw him. "You were late," she whispered. "I was delayed," Elias answered. "But we are moving now." She opened the door wider. For a split second Donna caught a glimpse of folders on the bed, a half-packed carry-on, and the kind of nervous stillness that belongs to someone who has been waiting for rescue without knowing if rescue still exists. Hale stepped forward just enough to make himself visible. "Ma'am, I am Colonel Marcus Hale. We are taking you to the secondary site. You will follow instructions exactly." She nodded immediately, one hand pressed to her ribs as though holding herself together by habit alone. No one in the lot knew her name, but that only made the moment feel heavier. This had never been about a trespasser or a suspicious stranger wandering motel property. It had been about protecting someone fragile enough to vanish and important enough to move the sky. Travis felt that realization settle into him like a stone. He remembered the wallet in his pocket, the way he had barely looked before deciding he knew more than the person standing in front of him. He remembered the cuff, the comments, the confidence with which he had taken control of a situation he had never understood. None of it looked small anymore. It looked reckless. Elias reemerged a moment later with the woman beside him and the sealed manila envelope from the duffel tucked under his arm. Hale signaled toward the lead vehicle, and 2 members of the team formed around them without crowding her, building a corridor of safety out of posture alone. As they crossed the parking lot, the helicopter above shifted again, and its shadow moved over Travis's cruiser like a dark hand passing judgment. No one asked him to help. No one needed anything from him. That, more than the reprimand, stripped him bare. He had built a whole identity around being the man who controlled the scene, the first voice, the final word. But now the scene was moving without him, and the final word belonged to people who never needed to raise theirs. Elias stopped once more before reaching the vehicle. He turned back toward the motel office, toward Donna, toward Travis, toward the little crowd of ordinary witnesses who would spend years explaining this night badly, because language would never quite fit it. "Some people look at a place like this," he said, "and think nobody important could ever pass through." His eyes settled on Travis. That is how real damage begins. The wind carried the sentence across the lot, and nobody tried to answer it. The convoy doors closed one by one with the soft, final sound of a decision being carried out by people who did not waste motion. The woman from room 214 was guided into the lead vehicle, the sealed envelope secured with her, And for the first time since the aircraft had arrived, the scene began to shift from revelation to consequence. Colonel Marcus Hale stood beside the open rear door for half a second, speaking quietly into an earpiece, his eyes never leaving the motel grounds. He looked like a man measuring not only what had been protected, but what had nearly been lost because someone had mistaken confidence for competence. Elias Grant remained outside the vehicle a moment longer, the blue duffel at his feet, rain mist clinging to his jacket, and the searchlight catching the edge of the metal case now back in his possession. Officer Travis Cole watched him from beside the cruiser, saying nothing because every possible sentence now sounded foolish before it formed. The radio on his shoulder crackled once with a routine dispatch from somewhere else in the county, some minor disturbance on a back road, some ordinary problem from the ordinary world, and the sound felt absurd in the middle of what this parking lot had become. Donna Reeves could not stop staring at Elias. She had spent years managing a property where desperation wore many faces, where tired salesmen, runaways, drifters, families in trouble, and lonely contractors all passed through under neon light and left before sunrise. She thought that had taught her how to read people. Tonight had exposed the weakness in that belief. She had not read Elias Grant at all. She had read her own fear, and then handed it a phone line and a badge. "I did not know," she said. At last, though the words sounded thin even to her. Elias turned toward her. His face did not soften, but neither did it harden. "That is the point," he said. "You did not know, and still you were certain." Donna lowered her eyes. No one rushed to comfort her. Some lessons arrived too late for comfort. Colonel Hale closed the vehicle door and stepped toward Travis Cole, stopping close enough that the deputy had to choose between meeting his eyes and staring at the wet pavement like a reprimanded child. Travis tried to straighten his shoulders, but the posture would not hold. The night had taken something from him that posture could not restore. "You interfered with a protected operation," Hale said. His tone remained level, which made it sharper. "You mishandled identification, retained personal property, and escalated a contact you did not understand." Travis swallowed. "Sir, with respect, I responded to a suspicious person complaint on private property. I made a judgment call." Hale nodded once, as if acknowledging the sentence before stripping it apart. "Yes," he said, "that is exactly what you did." Nothing dramatic followed. No shouting, no threats, just the clean, devastating weight of accuracy. Elias bent to lift the duffel bag, then paused and looked toward the dark windows of the motel office, the two silent guests, the deputy, the manager, the cruiser, the vacancy sign still blinking like a bad memory, trying to stay alive. "People always think danger announces itself," he said quietly. "Sometimes the real danger is the person who sees a black man standing still and decides that must mean he belongs in handcuffs." The words landed harder than anything else that had been said that night. Travis flinched, almost too slightly to notice, but everyone noticed. Because it was true. Not legally polished true. Not report-ready true. Just true in the old human way that cuts through every uniform and excuse. Hale gave a final signal, and the helicopters above began to drift wider, their shadows moving off the lot and across the highway like great dark birds losing interest in the small place beneath them. Engines rose. Headlights turned. The convoy prepared to leave. And as Elias reached for the rear door at last, he looked at Travis one final time with that same calm that had been there from the beginning. "You thought nobody would come for a man like me," he said. "That was your second mistake." The convoy began to roll, slow at first, tires whispering over wet gravel as the lead vehicle eased toward the motel entrance, and the others fell into place behind it with the same cold precision they had carried all night. Searchlights lifted from the parking lot one by one, sliding off the motel walls, off the faded numbers on the doors, off the cracked hood of Travis Cole's cruiser, until the place started to look like itself again, small and shabby and tired, except nothing about it felt ordinary anymore. Donna Reeves stood frozen in the office doorway, one hand still against her chest, staring as if the departing vehicles might somehow rewind the last half hour and return her to the moment before she picked up the phone. But some calls do not end when the line goes dead. Some calls keep echoing long after the sirens, the engines, and the voices have moved on. Travis remained beside the cruiser, shoulders rigid, face washed pale beneath the last swing of rotor light. The helicopter overhead pulled wider, then wider still, its thunder fading by degrees, and that was somehow worse than when it first arrived. Noise can hide a man from himself. Silence cannot. Elias Grant paused before stepping fully into the rear vehicle. Colonel Marcus Hale had already taken his seat beside the protected witness, the sealed envelope secure, the route changed, the mission continuing despite the damage nearly done. One of Hale's people held the door open, waiting. Elias did not hurry. He looked once more across the lot at the deputy, the manager, the neon sign, the two shaken guests still standing by the vending machine like witnesses who had stumbled into scripture and could not quite name what they had seen. Then he crossed back 3 slow steps, not enough to threaten, only enough to make sure the last lesson did not get lost in the exhaust. Travis lifted his chin a fraction, reflex more than courage. He looked like a man reaching for authority that had already left him behind. "I was doing my job," he said, and the sentence fell into the damp air with all the force of something he no longer believed. Elias studied him for a moment, rain collecting at the edge of his jaw, the night softening nothing in his expression. "No," he said. "You were doing what happens when fear borrows a badge and calls itself judgment." Donna closed her eyes at that. One of the guests turned away. The other stared harder, as if hearing the truth out loud made it more real than everything with engines and lights had managed to do. Travis opened his mouth, perhaps to defend himself again, perhaps to protest that he had followed procedure, perhaps to insist that he would have treated anyone the same. But even before the words formed, something in his face gave him away. He knew that was not true. He knew it the way people know the ugliest things about themselves only after the moment has passed, and there is no longer any stage left to perform on. Elias saw that recognition land, and when he spoke again his voice was lower, almost tired. A man does not become dangerous because you cannot imagine his importance. He let the sentence sit there, sharp and clean. And dignity does not need your permission to exist. Then he turned away for good and stepped into the vehicle. The door shut. The convoy moved out through the motel entrance and onto the dark service road, red tail lights shrinking into the mist while the helicopters peeled off overhead and disappeared into the clouds one after another until the sky finally gave the night back. What remained was the old vacancy sign buzzing against the dark, the smell of rain and hot engine metal, and a parking lot that had become a mirror no one wanted to stand in. Donna Reeves slowly sank into the office chair just inside the doorway, her cold coffee untouched, her face hollowed out by regret. The two guests slipped back into their rooms without a word, carrying the kind of story people tell softly for years because saying it too loudly makes them relive the shame of how long they stood there and watched. Travis Cole stayed where he was, alone beside the cruiser radio, crackling with ordinary calls from an ordinary county that no longer felt big enough to hide him. He looked up once at the empty sky, as if expecting one more machine, one more command, one more chance to understand what had happened. But the sky was done speaking. It had already said everything it came to say. By dawn the motel looked smaller than it had the night before, as if the darkness had carried away whatever false importance it once offered men who wanted easy control. The rain had passed, leaving the pavement slick and gray beneath a weak Arkansas morning, and the red vacancy sign still buzzed above the office like a tired warning no one had learned how to turn off. Donna Reeves opened the front desk an hour late. She moved slowly, not from age, not from illness, but from the weight of replaying every decision that had led to the parking lot becoming a place of judgment instead of shelter. The coffee pot was fresh, the register counted, the same old road stretching beyond Route 61, but nothing inside her felt returned to normal. She kept glancing toward room 214, even though it stood empty now, sheets stripped, lamp unplugged, silence folded neatly over the bed, where fear had waited for rescue and rescue had come dressed in rotor wash and command. The two guests who had watched from the vending machine checked out early without their usual complaints about the ice machine, the cable, the smell of the carpets. They signed their receipts quietly and left like people exiting a church after hearing something meant for them to. Officer Travis Cole did not come back that morning. Another deputy arrived instead, younger, softer spoken, carrying a clipboard and the expression of a man who knew he had been sent to gather facts from a scene already larger than his understanding. He asked Donna for timestamps, for the exact wording of her call, for whether Officer Cole had searched personal property, retained identification, or made contact with room 214 before the federal team arrived. Donna answered every question without trying to protect herself with confusion. The truth had become too expensive to edit. Around noon, a county vehicle stopped outside the sheriff substation 10 miles away, and by the end of the day, Travis Cole had surrendered his patrol unit, his access card, and the easy posture that had once made him feel untouchable. There were reviews to be conducted, reports to be compared, body camera footage to be examined, and statements to be taken from people whose words now mattered more than he ever expected. But the deepest consequence did not live in paperwork. It lived in the moment that kept returning to him whenever the room fell quiet. Elias Grant standing under broken neon, calm in handcuffs, warning him without anger, giving him chance after chance to choose humility over pride. Travis had thought power was something you wore on your chest. He had thought importance looked a certain way, spoke a certain way, belonged in certain places and not in others. He had thought a black man standing alone outside a rundown motel at night could safely be treated like a problem before being treated like a person. And that was the lie that broke open over him when the sky answered back. Miles away, on a route no motel guest would ever know, Elias sat in the rear of an unmarked vehicle beside the woman from room 214 as the convoy pushed east through thinning fog. The sealed envelope rested on the seat between them. Colonel Marcus Hale spoke quietly into a secure line up front, confirming transfer, confirming continuity, confirming that the operation had survived the delay. Elias leaned back and closed his eyes for only a moment, not from exhaustion alone, but from the familiar ache of knowing that even now, even after everything, the lesson was never really new. It was only repeated in different uniforms, different counties, different parking lots under different skies. A black man is doubted. Authority arrives too late for dignity, but just in time for consequences. The woman beside him looked over, voice low. You knew they would come. Elias opened his eyes and stared through the glass at the waking road. I knew the mission mattered, he said. I just did not know whether the men on the ground would remember that people matter too. Outside, the first real sunlight of morning spread across the tree line, pale gold over wet fields and roadside signs, and the darkness that had ruled the motel hours before finally began to release its grip. But some shadows do not live in the sky. They live in the instincts that decide who belongs, who is believed, who is protected, and who can be humiliated without consequence. That is why nights like this do not end when the helicopters leave. They echo. They sit in the chest. They force people to ask what they saw when they looked at a stranger and why they were so sure. Officer Travis Cole thought he was arresting a nobody in a forgettable place. What he really stopped was a mirror held up to his own assumptions. And when the sky darkened, it was not only to rescue one man. It was to remind everyone watching that dignity does not need a nice address. Power does not always announce itself. And the people most easily dismissed are often the very ones history sends back with the truth. He thought the motel was where nobodies got lost. He learned too late that sometimes the sky comes down for the man the world was too blind to see.